Good evening. My name is Sandra Fritz, and I'm the chairperson of the Shrewsbury School Committee. Welcome to our meeting of April 1st, 2020. Tonight is a virtual meeting, and it's being broadcast live on Selco channels 29 and 329, and is being streamed live on the Shrewsbury Media Connection website, thanks to the work of Mark Sarah. It will be rebroadcast between now and our next meeting on April 15th. The public participation portion of our meeting is suspended due to the fact that we are having virtual meetings. However, the public can email the school committee with any questions or comments that they have at schoolcommittee@shrewsbury.k12.ma.us. First on the agenda is chairperson and members report. Does anybody have anything this evening? There being none, I'll turn it over to Dr. Sawyer for superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. We will do a report momentarily about an update to the district's response to the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. I just want to begin superintendent's report this evening by saying many thank yous. First, want to thank everyone involved with the public health effort that is going on, the Worcester Division of Public Health and the Central Mass Public Health Alliance, who have been working incredibly hard to try to respond to all the various elements of this pandemic. I want to thank Noelle Freeman, who's our Director of Nursing here for the school district, who has been our key liaison with public health officials. The work that she's done, the communication she's been doing with all of our staff and families who have called with questions has been outstanding. I want to certainly thank our town leadership, all the town departments and the workers who are supporting the work that we're doing, public buildings in particular, who have continued to work to make sure that they're doing disinfecting of our buildings on an ongoing basis during the school closure period. And I also want to thank the many folks who are working on the front lines out in the community, particularly our medical professionals, our first responders. This obviously is a very difficult and challenging time for our community, and I appreciate everyone who's helping to help everyone get through this as healthily as possible. As far as the school district, I continue to be proud of the way that our school district is responding to this. I want to thank our food service workers who are working hard to provide meals to students who rely on our schools for their nutrition. I want to thank our paraprofessionals who are working remotely and doing a variety of professional development activities online. And they've adapted to the use of a variety of online platforms to be able to do that work. We appreciate what they're doing from home. I want to thank our educators who have been, from the start, working incredibly hard to shift their practice and adapt in ways based on the guidance we're getting from the state. And as we continue to roll out a more robust online and remote learning program, they've been extremely dedicated to connecting with their students and their families, and I'll speak to that a little bit in the report I will present. And I also want to thank our leadership team. The school administrators have been working long hours, long weeks, trying to manage all the various things that are happening. I know I was speaking with Mrs. Fritz earlier today and talking about that so many of us in different professions are learning to do things differently and having to manage the fact that sometimes things that are on autopilot under normal conditions take time and effort just to work through. And I want to thank our leadership team and our secretarial staff and our clerical support staff for all the various ways they're adapting to make sure the school district continues to run effectively during this closure period. I want to thank our parents, the parent community. This is a real challenge, of course, for people with young children, but children of any age, trying to help them work through this period of needing to stay at home and trying to help them learn from a home environment. And I know this takes a lot of effort, and depending on the family situation can be overwhelming for some. And so I appreciate the efforts our parents and families are putting in. And finally, our students. Our students are working to adapt to this new approach. I think that they've been doing a terrific job engaging with their educators, doing the work that's expected of them. We're seeing a higher level of engagement every day with them, and I just appreciate the work. We miss them terribly, of course, but thank everybody involved with what's happening during this, again, unprecedented time. And then one final thing before we move into our report, I do want to make sure I reference when I did send out an email a little bit earlier this evening reminding people of this meeting and what the agenda was. There was an agenda item that talked about the possibility that we discussed the possibility of entirely canceling summer vacation. That came with an asterisk. We are recording this, and this is live right now on April 1st, which of course is April Fool's Day. I appreciate the feedback I've had from some folks already, and trying to make sure that people know that that is indeed not a serious conversation for tonight, although obviously we'll have to look at what happens in the summertime as far as potential for extended learning depending on the length of this school closure. So with that, that's Superintendent's report, and be happy to move into the main report on our district's response to the pandemic, if that's fine with the chair.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to share some slides here. Okay, it looks like those slides are up at this point. And just want to again start by acknowledging that we've had to make a whole variety of adaptations in terms of what's happening here with this school closure. At this point, I'd like to, let me just make sure I can advance these. Here we go. Just want to start off again with some key facts. All Massachusetts public and private preschool and pre-K to grade 12 rather schools are now closed through at least Friday, May 1st. The first day that will be able to be reopened under Governor Baker's order would be Monday, May 4th. That's of course going to be subject to change depending on how the pandemic evolves, and we'll be awaiting any other announcements from the governor in the coming days and weeks. All of the town of Shrewsbury buildings remain closed. They will now also be closed that same period of time, at least through May 1st. Want to make sure that people understand that they can go to the website, whether that's for the school department or for town government. There's information there about how to pay town bills, for example, or communicate. Town hall is open, people are working, the school department is open. We'll talk about communication with us in a moment. But I also want to remind people that all town and school playgrounds are closed. I know Town Manager Kevin Mizikar, in one of his communications recently, emphasized again to our community, and especially our families with young people, that some people have been going past barriers to congregate on playgrounds. Obviously, we need to take this pandemic extremely seriously. We ask that people observe all the social distancing norms that have been established in order to help protect our community. All of our Shrewsbury Public School staff are working. The vast majority are working remotely. School offices are closed to the public, but you can reach school personnel. They're available by email if you want to email the school principal or the school secretary. The school department central office is also open. You can reach that, and the number I'll share in a moment, between 8 and 4:30 p.m. Want to let the community know that was released today that there are currently 29 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the town of Shrewsbury. I know some people have been asking about connections to the school community. The Worcester Division of Public Health has not shared with us any specific information about connections to our school community. We are aware of 2 Shrewsbury Public Schools parents who have been diagnosed through self-disclosure of one means or another. That is all we are aware of at the moment. All our schools, of course, have been closed for longer than the 14-day period people are advising people would self-quarantine, for example. But we have 29 confirmed cases in the community, and of course we expect that to go up as testing increases, and we're expecting the spread to increase, but hopefully flatten over the coming days and weeks. And as I mentioned before, we certainly urge all members of our school community to practice social distancing in order to limit the spread of the virus. As far as communicating with us, again, you can send an email to the email address you see on the screen, info@shrewsbury.k12.ma.us. You can call 508-841-8400 between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. And see the information that's posted on our website at schools.shrewsburyma.gov. The page looks like this. There is if you land on the main web page, the first link you can click on the home page brings you to this page, which is a posting of every public communication we've made to date regarding the COVID-19 situation. So if you're looking for information, our website's a good place to go. There are 3 key messages that I shared at our last meeting that I want to reiterate. First off, the most important thing, of course, is the health and well-being of all of our students and families and staff. That's our first priority. Secondly, this is an extraordinary time in history, and everyone, of course, in our community has a collective responsibility to respond to the challenge that's before us. And we know it's become more and more serious as the days have gone on. Even though our schools are closed, we continue to support our students, our families, our staff, even if it's from a distance, We want to continue to empower continued student learning, and Mrs. Clouder in a few moments will talk about how that program has been evolving as far as remote learning. I want to mention the efforts we've made to date. Again, as soon as the closure happened, we immediately began providing meals for students who rely on schools for nutrition. We continue to partner with St. Anne's Human Services and their food pantry to direct families who are experiencing food insecurity. And that's been critically important, and it has been going well. We also worked with the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The guidelines that they issued right away, the legal guidance regarding the ability to offer and suggest and what we could offer in terms of online learning opportunities. When that late last week changed, we immediately made the shift to providing learning assignments for students. We're in that mode this week. Again, Mrs. Clouder will talk more about this, as an even more robust learning plan is in the final stages of development. Thirdly, we surveyed families regarding the availability of internet and digital devices. We've begun providing access and devices to families who lack these, with more to come. Mr. Brian LaRue, our Director of Information Technology, has done an outstanding job with that outreach, and he and his team have been working to make sure they're providing devices. If you have any needs along those lines, please answer the survey you can find on our website, or contact Mr. LaRue by email. You can contact him through the info at email. We can direct that to him as well, or call the central office during our office hours. And I also want to say, of course, that our Shrewsbury Public Schools leaders and educators have been communicating frequently. They've reached out in a variety of different ways, through email, in some cases through video conferences, phone calls, in order to maintain those really important connections with students and their families. Everything we do is based on relationships, and we need to maintain those relationships and keep them strong during this challenging time. And of course, there are a variety of challenges we're experiencing. First off, in terms of the feedback we've received from families, there's a wide variation in families' preferences around the kind of remote engagement that their students are receiving as far as their learning opportunities. There are some families who want more, whether that's more volume of assignments or more opportunities. There are some families that have signaled to us that they are very overwhelmed with what's already being provided and are looking for some sort of assistance or the ability to try to figure out ways to manage that within their own household. And as everyone realizes, different households have very different levels of responsibility. There are many places where families and parents are needing to work from home and at the same time trying to manage young children during the day, which is why we're trying to provide a mix of activities and learning that can happen when families are available to do that. And we're going to be shifting more and more into being able to offer some opportunities during specific times during the day as well, that will be more live for student involvement. But we do recognize that many families are in challenging situations that may become even more challenging in the coming weeks if the number of cases goes up. We want to be sensitive to that, of course, but we also want to provide what we can to our students who are ready and able and needing to continue to learn using a remote type of approach. We're also challenged by equity and access. I mentioned the fact, of course, that some families, and we're trying to address this as best we can in terms of access to online opportunities and connections with devices or internet access. But we're also challenged by the restriction of what we can do remotely. A lot of what we do educationally is very hands-on. It's very involved in terms of needing to be present with students within a classroom or small group setting. And some of those services we provide often to some of our students who have the most challenges when it comes to disabilities is very, very difficult, and in some cases next to impossible, or not just impossible to replicate. You'll hear from Mrs. Belcito in a few moments around some things that we are doing to try to mitigate those things, but there's no question that's an incredible challenge given the situation that we're not able to be physically interacting with many of our students. We also are experiencing some issues with infrastructure as far as online resources being stretched. We know that we've been experiencing some nationwide outages of the Schoology platform. That's the online learning platform that we use in our middle and high school grades that students and faculty use. They've been trying to, I know Schoology has been trying to be responsive, and they've been ramping up their ability to maintain access during peak demand times. I believe that they said that they're experiencing as many as 20 million users at one time across the country. We ask people to be patient with those kinds of things. And of course, we're expecting our vendors will continue to adapt just as we are. We're also adapting different tools. One good example of that is the Zoom platform. for video conferencing. That's the platform we're actually using for this meeting right now. It was originally devised for business use. It's been adapted for educational versions. We appreciate that Zoom made educational versions of the platform available for free for public schools immediately when the closure started. And many of our educators have been using it. We're working through a couple of issues now. We expect that opportunity to be back up and running very soon. But there are some elements of that that needed to be adapted relative to the use for schools in the educational setting. And we also need to develop a system. We don't have a learning platform such as Schoology for our preschool through grade 4 students. Some of our 3rd and 4th grade families are able to use it in classes, but it's not a particularly widespread use. We're trying to determine what the best opportunity might be to create some more opportunities for remote learning exchanges using some sort of platform. In the meantime, we'll use what we have, whether those are email exchanges and those kinds of opportunities, but that's something we're also working on behind the scenes. So there are many challenges. We're working to adapt to them and overcome them. And again, I'm very proud of the way that our educators and administrators are working to try to make sure that what we can provide is of the highest quality we can under the circumstances. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Clowder, who can talk more specifically about our approach to remote learning and what we're doing now and what we are going to be doing in the coming days.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. At times like this, you're very conscious of the things that are special and important, and I want to begin with gratitude. We miss our students, we miss our families. I know our families miss our teachers, and although we are not physically together, the spirit of collaboration is alive and well, and I'm amazed when I sit back and think about all that's accomplished since the last time I spoke to you. So I want to acknowledge the efforts of both our staff and our families to support our students as we try to move to a more, as we try to keep connected and engaged and move to remote learning. As you know, the resources that were initially shared on our website offered some opportunities about what children could do across their levels and with their interests in mind, and they're still there to support choice. But one of the big changes that we've shifted to in this new mode is that we don't have our optional assignments have become must-dos, and targeted assignments have been assigned by level. So as we began to be prepared for school to be closed until May, we're still directed not to replicate school, and yet encouraged to identify what are the most important learning targets, given that the expectation for work completion should be about half of what it would be if we were together in classrooms. So teacher teams have been thinking about what are the most priority skills that we need to cover for kids, and how do we engage them in those skills in different environments. And we understand that the things that we've structured may seem like too little for some families and too much for others. And so as we've tried to develop the platform, we've also built it with flexibility in mind, both for families that are on the receiving end of the assignments and also for educators who may be at home orchestrating learning and also attending to the needs of their own families. So our initial goal was to think about flexibility and connection foremost. To that now we've added consistency, because if we're working on integrating new learning experiences, we certainly want to make sure that all students in a given grade span get the same experience of learning and the same degree of mastery to the extent that we can. And I think it's important to acknowledge that all of the members of our community in every department and in every school want to do all they can. And there's a steep learning curve for us too. So Dr. Sawyer referred a little bit to one of the challenges being that we don't have a platform at the elementary level to engage in pushing work out and receiving work back. And so our educators, being the innovators that they are, have tried a lot of different things. And we don't want to stop people from innovating, and yet we're working really hard to make it easy for families to make sense of all the different ways that we've tried to connect. So as we move forward, we're looking at content delivery, and we're thinking about how many interactions teachers will have with students, and we're thinking about the needs of students by level, and we're trying to establish some predictability for families so that there is not competition for devices or airtime, and yet there's the right amount of balance between self-directed learning and opportunities to engage with their classes and their teacher. as we move forward into the next phase, we're looking at how we can leverage technology platforms. And that means addressing the need for predictable chunks of learning. It means supporting students with diverse needs so that kids get what they need to access the curriculum. And it means thinking about which assignments do we want to get feedback from students on, and how do we correct their learning in ways that feel doable for parents. Parents are their child's first teachers, but I think especially during times of crisis, it can be overwhelming to be your child's only teacher. And so we're trying to forward this notion of parents as partners and thinking about what it should look like on the school end and also what it should look like on the home end. In some places, this is more easily done because, as Dr. Sawyer acknowledged, at middle and high school, we have a Schoology platform that is very driven by students because they have their own devices and they have a familiar routine with managing that. At the elementary level, for example, we have students who are familiar with devices, but the devices can be very different. Not all students have devices, and not all parents understand to the same degree our middle and high school students do how to manage those devices. So we've been putting together things like how to access a link and who to contact when you can't make sense of what the directions are in the packets that have been sent home. But I know that with time and with practice, we will all find a better way of balancing both kind of pencil and paper task and practice, and also ways to convey new learning in interesting ways. And ultimately, I think the efforts that we've engaged in to boost collaboration in a remote way and the conversations we've had about curriculum are going to serve us well over time. So I want to thank everybody for their patience as we've moved through these different phases of online learning and remote learning, and affirm that we're moving towards a more robust phase where, in addition to assigned work, we will be tackling new learning by identifying what are the priority learning targets by grade.
Thank you, Mrs. Clouder. And at this point, I will turn it over to Mrs. Meg Belcito, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, to talk a bit about how we're trying to deliver those student services during this time of the school closure.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. So the last time we spoke, I was referencing the U.S. Department of Education as well as the Massachusetts Department of Education. And at that point in time, they had come out with specific guidance about how to work with students during this time and families. Since then, we've had further conversation both at the state and federal level. And right now, the continued messaging from the Department of Education around the safety and well-being of students, the focus of equity on our most vulnerable, and maintaining connections between school staff and students. While also during this time, we have moved to remote special education services where the Department of Education is recommending 2 models of doing this work: providing student support and resources with disabilities to access content, and providing instruction and services directly to students. The Department of Education provided resources that we highly recommend that spotlights remote learning for students with special needs. It's important to remember that our special educators, including related service providers, will be using the goals and the intent of the IEP to guide their actions, their recommendations, and supports and services for students to the best of their ability. We recognize, particularly for students with more intensive needs, that this imperfect situation we find ourselves in will not allow for a delivery of services that mirrors what students would receive were we in school. We will do our absolute best, and we will strive to collaborate with all parents and with each other to provide opportunities to address the goals set forth by the IEP teams. The Department of Education is being very transparent that this new frontier in education and how we are going to need to support all students. With that being said, they've also helped us outline some areas that we will continue to work towards strengthening. Right now, we're focusing on these known hurdles as areas that we will continue to seek federal and state guidance and advisories on as we work towards allowing all students to access learning. As you can see, some of the areas include things like progress reports, report cards, licensing requirements for things like teletherapy, services for students with severe disabilities, family availability, virtual meetings, early intervention, progress monitoring, contracted services, and timelines and evaluations. As we move into the next few weeks, we expect that much of our staff, what they have been doing will continue to be appropriate and relevant. The main shift at this time will be the addition of documentation of what they are doing, as well as the development of scheduled opportunities for contact with students. We do expect that our approaches and our services will continue to evolve over this time, and we will support and guide staff and families through that process. The overall message sent out by the Department of Education is an important one for all of us to remember, that we will provide as many services as possible given the current circumstances, and that we will continue to ask ourselves, who can we get to tomorrow? As we look to the near future, we will continue to elicit ideas, input, and recommendations as we continue to develop guidance. And I too, like Dr. Sawyer and Ms. Clowder, want to thank all the leadership team, our colleagues, families, people that are reaching out in ways during such a difficult time in order to just put forth our best efforts right now. And we certainly continue to think of as many ways as possible to give students as much access to the services that they deserve.
Okay, I'm going to unshare my screen here. I want to thank Mrs. Clowder and Mrs. Belcito for those elements of the presentation. I do want to share a couple of other pieces of information in a moment with you. Just bear with me for a second. Just in terms of what people can expect around the next phase of what's happening relative to our remote learning program. I did share a message, or we shared a couple of different messages last week with our families and community. I taped a videotape message a week ago on Thursday that we shared with everyone as well. But we wanted to make sure that people understood that, what our goals are for this next phase of learning. First off, we're really working to keep our kids connected to their educators, to their classmates, in ways that enhance their well-being, because we know that obviously this is an unprecedented situation for our students being stuck at home essentially over a long period of time, when students, especially our early adolescents and adolescents, are social beings. This of course becomes a challenge for them, as it is for all of us. We're also going to be engaging students in remote learning with a focus on providing students supports to help all students learn from home, as was mentioned, maintaining their key academic and critical thinking skills, and helping students learn important content. We developed a whole set of different guiding principles that go with that, how we maximize students' access, create consistency, as Mrs. Clowder spoke about, empowering our educators to help innovate in ways to make that happen, providing structure and predictability at the same time for people, and emphasizing that independent, differentiated, and varied student work, knowing our different students have different needs. And then finally, instituting accountability with both flexibility and grace. We know that now we're moving to assignments that need to be done, but we also have to be mindful of the equitable access that students have to things, and also the different circumstances students find themselves in homes. So as we move to a more model of accountability for the learning that they need to do in a remote way, we also need to be flexible and understanding about different student situations, of course. We're going to be providing more details about this in the coming days. We'll provide that as soon as it's available. In the meantime, again, I remain very proud of the work that our educators, our families, and our students are doing. We'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has at this time.
Does the committee have any questions, comments? Dale?
Just a question. When are we going live with the more interactive, more intense teaching?
Yeah, I'd be reluctant to use the word intense because I think there's a lot of intensity that we're hearing from families around that being a problem. But in terms of it being more robust and more live in things, it's going to depend on a couple of things. It's going to depend on nailing down exactly what we think is the best opportunity to create scheduling that doesn't get elementary and middle and high school students in the same family crossing wires on when they have to use some of the same devices. It also frankly involves working with our Teachers Association to make sure we come to an agreement as to about what this will all entail. As a public school district, we're responsible for interacting with our employee groups. So when it comes to issues affecting their working conditions, that is something that the school committee will be discussing tonight in executive session. But I'm confident that we'll be able to move to that very rapidly. We've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes and collaborating with the leadership of both the Shrewsbury Education Association and the Shrewsbury Paraprofessional Association. And I'm confident we'll be able to move forward very quickly as soon as we have all those things done. I don't want to give an exact date, but I do assume we'll be able to make more of that shift coming into the early part of next week.
John, I think you had your hand.
Yeah, no, I can speak as a parent of an 8th grader at Oak and a senior in high school. I've definitely seen a change this week compared to the last previous weeks, where the first couple of weeks just informal engagement via email from some of their teachers, and then this week moving more to work that's available for them in Schoology. And I know both of my students have been working on this all week. So yeah, I'd like to thank everybody involved for tackling this really complex problem during a very unprecedented time. I think I lost my shoulder there. Okay. So yeah, no, I've definitely noticed a change, and I've seen recurring communication from each of their teachers, whether it be 8 Green in Oak or the high school teachers. So yeah, great job to everybody, and appreciate the hard work that's involved in doing something very complex and things that we're not familiar with under normal circumstances. So,
Anyone else have any comments or questions? Lindsay? I think you're muted.
I think I certainly want to acknowledge the incredible pressures that everybody in the district is under to figure out how to manage this and support our students and our staff. And it's a pandemic. We don't have a playbook for this. So I certainly appreciate that reality. As a parent, I have to have a different perspective, I think, than maybe what's happening in the Wensky household right now. My children are younger. The experiences they've received have been at very different levels in terms of engagement, in terms of amount of time that they're engaging. Some of that is personality of middle schoolers who just say they can get it all done right away. But now I'm in a house with 2 parents who are trying to work from home, who've never worked from home and don't want to work from home. And it is a challenge. And having a first grader who every assignment that comes to her requires one of us to attend to really at every step along the way. So this is certainly for our parent community. I want to acknowledge that this has been a little bumpy because as we try to figure it out. And I think I need to just put out there that we can ask for patience, but at some point, some of the frustration, we're starting to hear it in the neighborhood as you walk around, and people are looking for more at different levels, right? And I appreciate some want visualized instruction, some just want more hours. It is hard to figure out how to tackle, but definitely feel like learning feels a little stalled, and so there's opportunities to engage, but I'm not sure engaging and learning are different things. They're both important. And so one of the activities that one of my children had really felt far below his grade level, and so was sort of want to figure out how do we as a district avoid just things that fill time or feel like they're box checking, and also push learning forward. And I appreciate everybody on this call is trying to figure that out and trying to acknowledge it, but want to make sure that I understand what some parents might feel like hearing all those report outs that feel like we're working on it. And for some of them, they're looking for more from us. And so I want to just be clear that I support all of you in the work you're doing as we try to figure out, and know that frankly, my spouse would be mad at me if I hung up and didn't say, this week has not been fun for us, and trying to figure out how do we make sure. And so we're amongst that parent group that's figuring out other ways to supplement and say, you're not done, go back. And we're making accounts in Khan Academy and doing all that other stuff because I want some more. And I don't know, we're all quarantined, what all the rest of the parent community feels. I'm sure you're getting different pieces of it. But we know we also have a pretty robust parent community that wanted more from us before this began, and those people still exist. So I'm optimistic that we'll be able to figure out how to push some of this forward, and look forward to seeing more of that remote learning develop over the coming weeks.
Thank you. Ms. Fritz, if I might respond to that. Thanks. I do want to be clear, and I probably should have mentioned it earlier. The State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, in their, the commissioner just sent a letter out to all families in the state that we published and sent out to families yesterday, is strongly emphasizing that districts really focus on deepening learning that's already occurred, given the situation, and being very mindful of what the issues are in terms of introducing new learning. We are making that adjustment and are going to be introducing new learning to some degree. But I think it should be noted that there are a variety of our peer districts, especially closer to Boston, who in this next phase are being clear that they are not introducing new learning at all. So I think districts across the state are in very different places relative to what they believe is the right thing to provide and what's fair and equitable to students and families. We are making a measured approach where we believe we are going to need to introduce new content, that especially the most critical content that we think students would be getting over the coming weeks if they had been in school. And we're trying to find the right measure to do that with. But I think it's important for those watching that there are districts that are similar to us who are in a whole variety of places in terms of what they believe they're able to provide. I'd also want to be clear that, up until recently, the messaging was that if we started to provide new learning or even required learning of our students or required assignments, that we were putting ourselves in legal jeopardy through the Office of Civil Rights based on whether students would be able to, or families would be able to make legal claims against us. And part of our reason we were following the guidance of the Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Education was based on our responsibility to whatever we think we might wish to do to follow the laws and regulations that we're subject to as a public education entity. The U.S. Department of Education guidance shifted. Shortly thereafter, the state guidance, who implements all the special educations and civil rights laws, whether they're federal or state-based, shifted a few days later, and we rapidly shifted to a new stance and a new approach right after that, and are working to make sure that the next phase that we do tries to meet the needs of learners the very best we can, depending on what their needs are. I also want to be sure parents know, and we'll continue to remind them, that in addition to the required assignments being sent out, there are a variety of other assignments that they can also choose to engage with that teachers are providing. And then in addition to that, Mrs. Clouder and her team have provided a variety of options that are, whether it's online or engaging pieces that students can take part in. So I share and understand the frustration that many families have who would like to see us advance things more quickly. And in terms of how we're able to do that effectively, and in a way that makes sense for the vast majority of our students is going to be important for us to do. So I just think it's important to make sure there's some context that we are pressing ahead with some things that other districts that are very similar to us in terms of their results and their similar backgrounds, I guess, in socioeconomics are not making that shift yet. I know that's causing some consternation with some families in those districts. And again, some families are welcoming that and thinking that's the right way to approach it. This is classically going to be something that no matter what we do, we're going to have some families who are not happy with our choices. We recognize that, and we're trying to make sure that we think we're doing what's best for our students in terms of the learning that we can provide to them and the support under the circumstances that we have. So I just want to make sure that there's some of that context is expressed as well.
I really appreciate the context that Dr. Sawyer shared, and I want to add two things. One, thanks for being unafraid to share critical feedback, because when I invited families to reach out with concerns and questions, I absolutely meant it. When we hear what's frustrating for families, it helps us fine tune our plans. And as you mentioned, we're developing a plan that we don't have a playbook for. So as we've worked to kind of collaborate remotely with each other, some of the things that families have signaled has helped us make that plan better. So for example, one of the things we heard was, I'd love to have my kids engaging, because Dr. McGee asked when interactions would begin, and in some cases they already have. And families are finding that kids are fighting over getting to the device because both teachers have scheduled something at the same time. And so as a district, we have never before had to coordinate lessons across times and levels, and recognizing that that would lower the temperature with families was important. But that's just one facet of putting the plan together so that it will feel doable on both ends, at home and school. And the other piece is, I'd like to start as soon as possible. And one of the things that benefits us from going a little bit slower than other districts is that we can learn from what's happening as a result of what their initial plans are. And so I'm working really hard with district leaders in the district, but also district leaders outside the district to say, okay, so you launched, early, how's it going? And what are the things that you wish you'd done then? So we're trying to balance both the directives from the state, the feedback that we're getting from families, and the challenges of collaborating remotely with multiple stakeholder groups around issues like what's the right level of homework that we know, from our homework committee, we had really diverse perspectives on. So I don't want to belabor the point by saying thank you for your patience, because I think our teachers are impatient too. And if they could choose, they would not be working from home.
Anyone else?
Mrs. Fritz, if I may.
Jason?
I just want to take a minute to commend our district leadership team, and in particular the teaching staff throughout Shrewsbury Public Schools for all the work that they've been doing over the past few weeks. And I think while I recognize this is a really challenging time for families, families are navigating changes in home life, changes in work that are not only monumental changes unto themselves, but are the work remotely and everybody at home all day long. Nature of all that is forcing everybody to grapple with all of those different changes all at once. 3 weeks ago, our 6,000 plus students in Shrewsbury Public Schools were all being educated in traditional classrooms or some semblance thereof. A couple weeks ago, we had our 6,000 kids going to school in classrooms with teachers, receiving education in an innovative but traditional setting. And in a period of weeks, we have been forced to move the operations of this district to operating remotely. We have been forced to provide services against a backdrop of legal guidance that tells us that we expose this district and the taxpayers of this community to serious jeopardy if we violate that guidance, and against the backdrop of just how monumental a task this all is. I have really been inspired by the commitment and dedication and resourcefulness of not only the district's leadership team, but our individual teachers who have gone out of their way to create learning environments and opportunities that they probably didn't think they were going to need to create just a few weeks ago. If you look at what Shrewsbury Public Schools has done in a few weeks, if you told us over the course of a year we would have to get the district to this level, it would be something that we would struggle to provide. And yet here we are, we've been forced to do it in just a few weeks. So I am just bowled over and impressed by the work that our staff has done. And for families, I recognize that these are challenging times. These are challenging times for everybody. And there is not going to be a solution that comes down the pike that meets everyone's needs. There is not going to be a day where everything just works fine. We are in the midst of a national pandemic that obviously as a nation, we were not prepared to deal with or address. And there is just not going to be a day so long as this persists where everyone's needs are being met, where everybody's having an okay and a great day. Hopefully a lot of folks, hopefully a majority of folks will have some great days. And hopefully a lot of folks will have a lot of needs met, but there's just not going to be a day where everyone is having all of their needs met. I am astounded by the amount of work that this district has been able to do in just a few weeks. And I am bowled over and impressed by that. And again, I recognize that there are families at home who are having a rough time right now. And I just, recognizing that, I want to say that I think that our district leadership and our teaching staff are doing their absolute best to try to meet as many of those needs as they possibly can. So thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I think Ms. Clowder said it best. There's no playbook for this. There's no playbook for the schools. There's no playbook for families who are trying to bring children at home that they're trying to help with educational services. We do want to make sure that we're engaging and there's learning going on, but we know that this is uncharted. We've said it continually since it started. So thank you to Dr. Sawyer and his staff. Like Jason said, this has been a tremendous amount of work. It's not easy. We're going to get better as we go along. And I think patience is still continued. But I know central office is working extremely hard in very long hours to get a lot of this accomplished because we've never done it before. So thank you to Dr. Sawyer and his staff. Anything further on this topic? We're good? Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to talk about a succession planning policy for district administration. There is currently no formal school committee policy regarding succession should the superintendent of schools be unable to fill the duties of the office for a limited period of time. And given the fact that we're dealing with a pandemic, we thought that this would be something that we should have as a school committee policy. And Dr. Sawyer is going to present his recommendation for that to the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. We've had an informal approach to this in the past relative to covering when the superintendent's on vacation or that has to be out for a few days for whatever reason, illness or the like. Wanted to be sure that we put something into place that puts some policy guidance around this for both superintendent as well as the school committee. What you have is a memorandum from me that with the draft of the proposed policy, which unlike typical policies when we usually have a first reading and then vote on it at the subsequent meeting, because this policy really is more focused on what the school committee is comfortable with and isn't probably as sensitive to what public opinion might be. It's really more of a mechanical piece around the operation of the school district. I am suggesting that you vote on this evening if you are comfortable doing so we can put it into place. The policy would have a variety of aspects. First off, if it mentioned that the superintendent of schools is either unable or unavailable for some reason to fulfill his or her duties, that if that only is going to be for 3 or fewer work days, if the superintendent were at a conference or had bereavement time or had a short illness, 3 or fewer work days would not require any formal action, with the understanding that the various other members of the district leadership team would support the school district operations as necessary during those days. For short-term absences that are anticipated, that are known ahead of time, that would be greater than 3 days, working days, but no more than 10 working days, or the equivalent of 2 working weeks. The superintendent would then be expected to name one of the qualified district level administrators as the acting superintendent during that time period. That might change from period of, depending on what's happening at that particular time in the cycle of the work year. For example, if it's sometime that's very intensive around the budget work, it might be that I would choose Ms. Clouder, who's our assistant superintendent for curriculum. For a different time of year, I might choose Mr. Collins, who's our assistant superintendent for finance and operations, and so forth. In those cases, the superintendent's responsibility would be to notify the school committee and the district level administrators and principals so that they know who was serving in that acting role. But regardless of the superintendent's action in those cases, the school committee always has the authority to choose to convene and vote to appoint a qualified individual of the school committee's choice to be the acting superintendent. Further, if the anticipated absence of the superintendent is expected to last for either more than 10 work days, or there's an unanticipated absence that's likely to go beyond that initial 3 work days where the superintendent was not able to appoint someone beforehand, then the policy would state that the school committee would convene as soon as possible in an emergency session, if necessary, in order to appoint a qualified individual to serve then as acting superintendent. The policy then goes on to define that someone who's in the role of acting superintendent is only to use the authority of the office of superintendent to act in the case of emergency or an urgent issue that requires action, can't wait for the return of the superintendent. Acting superintendent would be responsible for ensuring effective day-to-day operations and would not take action on issues that can reasonably be postponed or delayed until the superintendent returns. But then also the last point of the policy would be that if it became apparent that the superintendent's absence would extend beyond a point in time where the school committee determines that it's really necessary to have someone vested with the full authority of the office of the role of superintendent, then the school committee would then choose to convene and vote to appoint an interim superintendent, which would be different than acting superintendent, who would assume then those full responsibilities of the role until such time as either the superintendent returned to work or otherwise the interim superintendent position would become unnecessary. And then, as we try to do with all of our policies, we'd say we'd review this within 5 years of its enactment. So that's a summary of the proposed policy. I'm happy to hear if there are any questions or suggestions from the committee. And then I would ask you to vote so that we can put this into effect as of this evening.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Dr. Sawyer? I see none. Excellent. Anything further, Dr. Sawyer?
Nope. Again, I would recommend that you adopt the language as it's proposed in the memorandum dated April 1st. And I believe there's a suggested motion in your packet.
Yes. Okay, may I have a motion to approve proposed school committee policy 243, establishment of an acting superintendent?
So moved.
So moved. Second.
Roll call vote or voice call vote. Jason,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Lindsay.
Aye.
Dale,
Aye.
myself, aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next, Mr. Collins will provide an update on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on finance and operations.
Okay, so I have a presentation to share with you. And I know is in your packets. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously there's been much happening with respect to the impact of the pandemic on the educational system. And in a similar way, there's been enormous impact on the fiscal operation. So I'm going to give what is, I'm calling a preliminary assessment of some of those impacts. And as this situation evolves, so too will the financial implications. So just want to cover a couple of topics related to some of the unbudgeted expenses that we have incurred, impact on special revenue funds and potential revenue losses, depending on your vote this evening regarding our tuition-based programs. Talk a little bit about the extended school care program, food service, facility rentals, for example. And hit the topic of grant funding, field trips, and preview a little bit of the memo that and recommendation from Dr. Sawyer around pay continuity for the staff, and also talk a little bit about some of the operational savings that are resulting from the closures as well. So first, in terms of some, again, early unbudgeted expenses, right now we're at approximately $48,000. And this is, some hygiene and nursing supplies and cleaning supplies for office areas. Our technology director has purchased some cellular iPads, and we've secured Verizon services for internet access for those iPads for students who communicated to us that they did not have any type of internet access in their home or device that could be used. That's approximately $15,000. And while we did reach out to Celco about providing internet access to those families, they're in shutdown mode pretty much right now as well with respect to only essential services. And so they're not going into homes to install new services. So in lieu of that, they offered to provide half the funding for those iPads in the Verizon services, which we're very appreciative of them doing. Also, we recently procured educational upgraded licensing for the Zoom technology, which is about $30,000. So again, all told, right now we're at $48,000. Just as a reminder, Dr. Sawyer referenced all of the school cleaning and repetitive sanitization of schools that's ongoing. And those costs are borne by the Public Buildings Division because they manage those operations, custodial operations, and contract cleaners. So those costs are hitting their budget, not the school budget. And certainly, we're gonna come up against other costs that we just haven't hit yet at this particular point. And so we'll just see what those are as we continue to move through this pandemic. terms of some of the types of savings with the school closures, of course, no day-to-day substitute teachers. And so I've just plotted out there what would be some of the estimated or projected savings on a monthly basis for day-to-day substitutes. And while we know that schools are closed through the month of April, you can see there between March and April, just day-to-day substitute savings in the order of about $76,000 just for that particular category of expense. We typically would have been into the spring athletic, high school athletic season by now, and having some transportation costs and costs for officials. So we're not incurring those costs. And then just general and educational supplies for the schools themselves. So just in terms of March and April operational savings, we're estimating right now, I'm estimating right now to be in the range of about $108,000 March through April. And then you can see if school closures were to be extended, how those savings would be extended for those particular categories. I will say that with respect to day-to-day substitutes, like I said in the note, if we resume operations in early May, and we're still experiencing this COVID-19 throughout the community, we could expect to have significant staff absences as well. So some of those savings that we incurred earlier with the closure could be overcome with additional expenses in the latter part of the school year. So that's all just projection at this point. In terms of some of the lost revenue, again, this is based upon an assumption that we're going to ask the school committee to take a vote at the end of this about suspending tuition payments for preschool, full-day kindergarten, extended school care programs during the closure periods. But again, just for example, in the month of March, you can see while the cafeterias are closed, we're estimating lost revenue of $134,000. If we were to charge no tuition for the second half of March and give credits for lost days, would be just over $31,000, $24,000 for full-day kindergarten, and over $100,000 for extended school care. And of course, our schools are not being rented to outside groups. That has been an important revenue source for us on an annual basis. And you can see, with closures in March, just the second half of March, looking at what happened last year during that same time period, looking at lost revenue of about $17,000. And, that fund we use for partial funding for 3 different positions who help manage that operation as well. And finally, another potential lost revenue area would be athletics. Again, if we don't have the spring season, then we would not be charging students for those spring athletic fees, and that would be about $100,000 for that. So those are some of the estimated revenue losses by category and month. So coming towards the recommendation around the tuition-based programs, again, full-day kindergarten, preschool, little colonials, and extended school care. We're recommending at this point, given the gravity of the situation and the negative impact on families, the suspension of billing of tuition payments for each day that those programs were closed. And instead of issuing refund checks, which would be administratively very, very burdensome at this particular point in the crisis with less staff on hand, that instead we provide credits for future months, again, with the assumption that we're going to be returning to school. And then those credits would be applied to what bills they would have for May and June. Certainly, we do have some families every year who decide to pay us up front for the entire year of the service, whether it be full-day kindergarten or preschool, and sometimes extended school care. So of course, in those situations, we would provide refund checks after we figure out what that total refund would be based upon the amount of days that school was closed. So what does this look like? So this is just one example of full day kindergarten, what this might look like if the family were paying the full tuition rate of $2,400 and having school closed through May 1st and reopening on May 4th. That would be the assumption of this particular example. Again, we'll have to see how this plays out, but that would provide a credit due of $352. And then you can see in the chart there that we bill out full day kindergarten across 9 months of the school year in pretty much equal payments, except for the first month. And so parents have already paid through March, and we know that half of March was closed and April will be closed. So that credit would be applied towards what would have been the April payment and then part of May. And so the May payment, again, assuming resumption of school on May 4th through the rest of the entire school year, that final payment would be $180, and therefore they'd only be paying just over $2,000 and receive that $352 credit. So that's how the credits would work. It would be handled by the schools on a school-based level, at the elementary schools by the school secretaries, and those are again billed out monthly in an electronic fashion, and most people pay online. One of the things that we think is important is that at the same time, while we're recommending credits, that we also recommend that we keep intact the 30-day calendar day notification period for withdrawal. We have had some parents reach out already, telling us that they would like to withdraw, not a lot, but again, we would like to make sure that that policy, which has been in place for many years, that they provide us 30 calendar days notice in advance of withdrawal. Shifting gears a little bit to grant funding. Again, we receive about $2 million in federal and state grants. Those funds typically come with lots of regulations, and we have 13 of our staff who are fully or partially funded by those grants. It's been communicated to us through the Department of Education that we can continue to pay our staff working in a remote environment through those grants, which is good news. We don't know of any negative impacts on the levels of grant funding at this point. None of that has been conveyed to us. We expect to still receive the same amounts that we were told at the beginning of the school year. But we do know that probably some of these grants will have to be amended along the way, and that's pretty much an administrative function and fairly routine with the Department of Education. Moving to another topic of field trips. So Dr. Sawyer and the administrative team had this discussion, again, based upon some guidance with the Commissioner of Education, that once we return to school on the scheduled date of May 4th, that all out of school field trips, the Commissioner recommended that they be canceled. And so we've decided that Dr. Sawyer's decided that those would be. And so each of the schools are in the process of communicating that to students and parents, and we'll be asking in those cases where parents have already paid, the schools will be communicating to those impacted parents through a Google form, asking them if they would either like to make their field trip cost of $10 or $12 a donation to the school. And so therefore we would just keep those funds for a future student activity, or rather B, that they would like to receive a refund of the $10. And so we're kind of going through that whole process right now. And there aren't a lot of these trips. I believe there's about 3 at Oak in this situation, and 1 at Floral. And I think a small one at Patton School where funds had already been paid. So we'll be working through those situations in the coming weeks. And in those cases where a refund is due, issuing checks for that. Moving to pay continuity plan and decision-making. Dr. Sawyer has next on the agenda, a letter with the recommendation for pay continuity. And this kind of just provides a little bit of context in advance of that. And with respect to all of our administrative and teaching staff, we know that people are working remotely or in office, and that our hourly staff are working in different ways, as was mentioned before, with more to come with respect to paraprofessionals. Some of our food service workers are working on the meal support program, and our extended school care staff obviously cannot provide those services in a remote fashion. But those are the three different areas, if you will, three major areas of hourly staff. And with respect to funding, of course, the paraprofessional funding has been always intact in our operating budget, and those funds are available to provide for pay continuation. With respect to the food service operation, that operates differently. It relies upon the revenues it receives for sales of meals and also government reimbursement. And so while Dr. Sawyer's recommendation will be in a few minutes here to continue pay for all of our staff through April 17th, which is the end of the next pay period, I wanted the school committee to know that there are adequate funds in that separate food service fund to pay for those staff, despite the loss of revenue. We had a beginning of year fund balance that we will be spending down in order to provide that pay continuation if that's what the school committee votes. And in a similar way, we had fund balance on account with the extended school care program at the beginning of the year. And there will be funds on hand to pay that group of staff through April 17th, if that's what the school committee decides to do. And again, that assumes a March 4th reopening and resumption of services. You know, I think that obviously the programs like the extended school care program and the food service operation, which rely on their monthly revenues, we're going to continue to closely analyze what the impact would be for any type of closure beyond May 4th, and provide separately at a later time at your April 15th meeting, a separate different, possibly different recommendation around pay continuation after that analysis is done. But right now we feel like with the funds that are available and what other school districts are doing and the guidance from the commissioner for pay continuation, that we would certainly recommend that we do that through at least April 17th. Again, it's consistent with the statewide guidance, and we certainly want to preserve our workforce so that when this crisis is over, that we have all of the staff at the ready to come back to work and resume operations just like we were operating before this pandemic began. Also, this type of recommendation ensures that those staff that have benefits like health insurance have the funds to continue to pay for those benefits, which is especially important during a pandemic. And that if, for example, some community members, of course, we know there's a lot of economic impact of this in the all across the sectors of our economy, and some workers are being laid off. In a municipality in Massachusetts, if a worker were to be laid off, for example, it's not some separate fund or pot of money that takes care of that cost. It's actually, they are paid by the Mass Unemployment Insurance Pool, but then we subsequently get billed as a town for all the monies that were paid out to that unemployed employee. So it's really, in our case, while we might, if we were to lay somebody off, we might save money, say, in the extended school care fund, but then we'd be shifting approximately 50% of that cost over to the town budget, and they'd be liable to pay for that. So again, we'll continue to evaluate the financial position as this goes on and provide a separate recommendation at your April 15th meeting. The other areas that are important to discuss are school transportation, out-of-district special education tuitions, and those educational services provided by independent contractors. We have received guidance from the commissioner, again, to provide where it's possible and where it makes sense, a continuation of payment for services, despite the school closures and vendors not, in some cases, not providing services. So I'm just going to take these one at a time because they're important topics. School transportation, for example. When we reopen schools on May 4th, we're going to need the yellow buses rolling with the drivers, knowing the routes and ready to go, just like we never closed. And most of Massachusetts school children are provided transportation by private vendors who are contracted by school districts. We need to ensure the viability of these transportation companies through the school closure period, so that they are there for continuity of services when we reopen. So on a statewide basis, while everybody has different contracts with their vendor, the Department of Education has facilitated a process and recommended that school districts with the same vendor get together and negotiate a different, presumably lower daily rate with their provider, and still provide some measure of pay continuity for those vendors for them to pay for all of their fixed and overhead costs so that they remain viable during the closure period. And of course, separate out those costs that they're not paying for, like fuel, and if they've laid off their employees, the employee costs. So it's a pretty complicated issue. It's an important issue. And with respect to our provider, they provide services to about 17 different communities in central Massachusetts. And I'll be working with the business manager from the Wachusett region to talk to AA Transportation about negotiating a different daily rate. Then we would have to develop a transportation contract amendment that could be used by all 17 communities, and then bring this back to the school committee for your approval to provide some paid continuity for the transportation company. A little bit differently, but the same concept, is the out-of-district special education tuitions. Again, those schools are providing different levels of remote learning to students. Some residential schools are still providing services, full services, but when schools fully reopen, we need them to be viable and have all of their staff on board, just like before the closure, and ready to go. So the commissioner has recommended actually full payment for all of those placements to hold those slots so that they can remain at the ready and provide paid continuity for their staff, and then student services when we reopen. Finally, the independent contractors, these are going to just have to be handled on a one-off basis. I did talk with Mrs. Belcito today. And so for those providers, and this is mainly special education providers for different types of services, whether it be speech therapy or educational consulting or vision services, that if these independent contractors are able to provide services remotely to our students or to our district, then of course, they could bill for those services and we would provide payment. But or in those cases that they cannot, then we will not be paying for those services. So those are three important areas with respect to contractor payments that we're working through. Finally, again, as everybody has said before, it's an evolving situation. There's lots of uncertainty. The information changes almost on a daily basis. But the net result is that we do know that we're experiencing now financial distress, and that it has the potential, in fact, to be even more or exacerbated in next fiscal year with the loss of revenue to hit the entire economy and probably our state budget as well. We've been very fortunate and thankful to receive lots of inquiries from the community about how people can help. And so we're offering a few ideas for people who might be tuning in or watching later. And first and foremost, the ways that people can help in terms of a financial basis would be if you have an overdue lunch account or an overdue payment. You would know that by looking in the parent portal and looking at your student fee account. And it would be very helpful if during this period of time, people could make good on all of those overdue payments that might exist with your student account. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, many people have asked about how they can help needy families. And we've had this program in place for a while, which is people can make charitable donations using this web link here, which is on our website under the Food Service Department. And it's called the Erase Student Debt Program. And so people who want to make donations there, all of that funding will go to pay off the debt of needy families for either overdue lunch payments or other types of district fees. We've actually had over 130 people make donations so far this school year to the tune of over $6,000, and we're very grateful for that. And I know that the families that are the recipients of that are thankful as well. Another way to help during this program is with the internet access piece. We're again always taking donations through the Colonial Fund. If people want to make donations to help offset the cost of the purchase of the cellular iPads that we had to purchase or the Verizon services for those families, donations could be made to the Colonial Fund to help support that program. Another way, and this might sound a little bit different, but supporting Shrewsbury restaurants. In case folks don't know that the meals tax from all of the Shrewsbury restaurants in town on an annual basis provide over $500,000 in revenue to the town every year. And we know that the restaurants have been significantly impacted with this closure, and many of them are doing takeout services. And so this could be a good way to not only help those businesses, but also, again, the meals tax, keep that meals tax going in, goes directly to the town coffers, and we're the indirect beneficiaries at the school department of maintaining that level of revenue. Partnering with St. Anne's Food Pantry, again, they've had a program long in place to provide food, household food, and gift cards to needy Shrewsbury families. And we know that a number of families have already done that, and groups have done that. They provided, St. Anne's told me that they received over $3,000 in gift cards from a group of families that got together to help out with that. They prefer denominations of $10 and $20. And those get handed out with the food donations on their regular schedule. Information on St. Anne's Food Pantry website for that. And then finally, excuse me, we know that Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, which is a great partner to our school district, is also experiencing financial distress as their gala got canceled. That was their main fundraiser. And so they are also looking for donor support as well. And again, if you help that organization, you are indirectly helping the school department because we rely on them for a variety of family support services. So in terms of, excuse me, action recommended, at this particular point, we are asking the school committee to take a formal vote to waive the tuitions for full-day kindergarten, preschool, and extended school care on a per diem basis for all the days that schools are closed by the state or district due to COVID-19, and to provide tuition credits for future payments, and only refunds in those cases where the tuition already paid exceeds the revised tuition amount due. And further affirm that any other payment terms such as notice for disenrollment and late payment fees still apply. We think that's an important piece to keep in place. So that's what I have at this particular point, and I'll stop sharing this. And happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And I'll ask if we keep those to the full day K, preschool, and extended school care, and then maybe hold our questions about payroll continuity till Dr. Sawyer does his presentation, to keep those separate. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Lindsay?
I just wanted to really appreciate, I'm in support of the plan. I think it makes sense and it explains what we're saying to families and putting some clarity in place when we know many families are going through a lot of economic upheaval. But I also really just want to commend you, Dr. Collins, for raising, Mr. Collins, for raising all the different ways that the community can band together to support each other during this time. So we were just talking about how do we support kids and families, but there are lots of people for whom the economic upheaval is much more pressing than what are my children learning in first grade. And so getting food to people and making sure that the well-being of our young people and families in our community is certainly a really important piece as well. So I really wanted to thank you for lifting that up.
Sure. You're welcome. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? I don't see anything else. I do have a question on the extended school care. If someone withdraws from that program, so they will lose their slot in that program and have to go back into a waiting list if there is one?
Yes, that's exactly right. And I'm glad that you raised that point. That's been the policy that's been in place. And we think that that's an important one to keep in place as well. There have been a couple of inquiries about that. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you. I too think, I support this. It's fair for families who are probably experiencing financial difficulty. I think there's going to be more as the weeks go by, and it would be unfair to charge for services that we're not giving for these three items. Dr. Sawyer, do you have any comments or questions?
I want to thank Mr. Collins for all the work he's done behind the scenes to put this report together. I think that it's sobering. Obviously we'll be talking in the coming weeks and months about the impact on next year, which is going to be very significant, I'm afraid. And we already had a very difficult budget ahead of us, regardless of this new situation. I also want to emphasize or reiterate Ms. Heffernan's comments about, and we'll be posting these slides tomorrow. We'll send them out to the community and we'll remind people about the ways that they can help. And it's always gratifying to see how many people are reaching out to see how they can help during this difficult time. And I'm glad Mr. Collins included those elements in his report. But I do support the recommendation around relieving families of these where these services can't be provided right now, and crediting them to their accounts, assuming we'll be back at some point. And if it turns out that for things evolve and we're not able to come back, obviously we'll come back with a different approach. But I think this makes sense given what we know at this point.
Thank you. There's nothing further. May I have a motion to waive tuitions for full day kindergarten, preschool, and extended school care on a per diem basis for all days schools are closed by the state or district due to COVID-19, and provide tuition credits to be applied for future payments due for the current year, and only provide refund checks in those cases where the tuition already paid exceeds the revised tuition due for the 2019-2020 school year, and further affirm that all other payment terms such as notice for disenrollment and late payment fees still apply.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, voice vote. Jason?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Dale?
Aye.
Lindsay?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Motion carries.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Okay, next, Dr. Sawyer will provide additional information on the payroll continuity for all staff during the school closure period.
Thank you. Mr. Collins explained the approach during his report. Again, this is a recommendation from the Commissioner of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education around the ideas of keeping school workforces intact across the Commonwealth. Essentially, we appreciated, and I know the employees deeply appreciated the school committee's decision at your last meeting to continue to pay through the initial closure period. Now that that's been extended, Mr. Collins, of course, did his analysis of our financial resources, and as he stated, we are quite confident that we have the resources in place to pay all of our employees through the next payroll, which will be through Friday, April 17th. And for context, because there's obviously time after the pay period ends, when pay is actually provided, the pay for the period ending April 17th would actually be coming to employees at the end of April. I believe it's April 29th would be the payday for the period ending April 17th. So this will continue pay through the month of April, in essence, in terms of when employees would receive their deposits. This recommendation, of course, is made with the understanding that we'll need to continue to do analysis. We will be coming back to you 2 weeks from now at your April 15th meeting with an additional recommendation in terms of going beyond April 17th. Of course, the closure will last minimally through May 1st. But at this point, we wanted to go payroll by payroll period with the information that we definitely have confidence in. So with that, I do recommend, and I have a motion in your memo, that you continue pay for all of our employees through that April 17th pay period. I'm happy to answer any questions about the recommendation.
Anybody have any comments or questions?
Just a comment, if I may.
Sure.
I just want to say I support the recommendation, and I support generally the continuing payment of our staff to the extent we are financially able to do so. The success of our district depends on these folks, these staff members who are going above and beyond right now in unprecedented times. To deny them financial security, I think puts them at risk and puts at risk the quality of programming we're going to be able to offer as a district. So to the extent we are able to do so, I support continuing to pay our staff.
Thank you, Jason. Dale?
I just want to inquire, I think some of the employees who we are continuing their pay are providing off-site services of one sort or another. Others are unable to. I support the idea of continuing everyone's pay. I don't want anyone to run into financial problems because of this crisis. But I wonder whether there may be opportunities to take advantage of the accumulated hours we paid for and did not see, and to accomplish some other projects within the department or the community after the virus issue has gone away.
Thank you, Dr. McGee. I can speak to, in terms of what we are trying to have people do remotely from home, regardless of the role. I think I mentioned in my earlier report that paraprofessionals, for example, have been doing some online training modules as part of their responsibilities. In food service, variety of food service workers are working on the provision of meals, although certainly not all of them are doing that every day, given the volume. And then, our secretaries and support staff are continuing typical work from home, some slight variations, and teachers are working in full days essentially with doing the work of connecting with families and the remote learning pieces that we have been and will continue to put in place. I will ask Mr. Collins if he has any insight into the legality of future work for pay that's already been provided for folks who are considered to be non-exempt hourly staff. That's something we can certainly look into in terms of, if I'm understanding the question, potentially providing services at a later date for pay that's happening currently. So, Mr. Collins, do you have any insight into any of the legal issues with that?
Well, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that, the provision of hourly wages is highly regulated by federal and state law. And then some of these folks that we're talking about also are part of collective bargaining agreements. So we'll have to kind of navigate through those two different dimensions to explore that topic.
Great. Anyone else have anything? No? All set? Okay. May I have a motion to approve the continued compensation of all Shrewsbury Public School employees through at least April 17th of the mandated school closure of the mandated school closure for the COVID-19 pandemic, including both salaried and hourly employees at their contractual rate of pay based on their typical time worked per pay period.
So moved.
Second.
Voice vote. Jason?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Dale?
Aye.
Lindsay?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Motion carries. Thank you. At our meeting on March 18th, Mr. Collins provided tuition information for full-day kindergarten for the 2020-2021 school year and provided potential illustrations of adjustments in the context of maintaining the direction of stepping down tuition incrementally while acknowledging the FY21 budget pressures. Tonight, Dr. Sawyer will make his recommendation based on feedback for the committee on that tuition.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. This has been an important topic, of course, for the school committee since you established your policy and strategic priority relative to providing tuition-free full-day kindergarten for all students in Shrewsbury when the new Beale School opens, because that will be the first time that we'll be able to have the actual space capacity to provide seats for every student to have full-day kindergarten. As the committee knows full well, but for those who are maybe watching for the first time, this is a level of programming in kindergarten that has become essentially the expectation in Massachusetts. 92 to 95% of districts are providing full-day kindergarten for all their students, and a very significant majority are doing that with no tuition charged to families, and that's something that we needed to catch up to the times, and it's something I'm glad we're doing as a school district. We had made the effort to step that tuition down so that we would reduce our reliance on that tuition income. You saw with Mr. Collins' earlier report how critically important that income is when you're relying on it to run the district or certain programs. The budget for next year assumed a step down from the current $2,400 per year to $1,200, and the following year it would go to zero, which would have created essentially a $240,000 amount, that estimate that would need to be shifted to the appropriated budget in order to move away from utilizing that tuition stream of funding. What I am recommending to you this evening is to not go with the original assumption of $1,200 annually, but step it down only slightly from $2,400 to the amount of $2,205. And the odd number there is because that fits into 9 monthly payments in an even way. For fiscal year 21, there'll be an overall reduction of $195 for families. But by not lowering it all the way to $1,200, that would provide approximately $200,000 more towards closing the budget gap that exists for next year compared to what it was originally assumed at. I think it's very important to note again that if the committee chooses to adopt this recommendation, that the estimated amount that would need to be shifted to the appropriate budget in fiscal year 2022 when the new Beale School opens would then become about $440,000 would be our estimate instead of the $240,000 originally projected. And while certainly it's undesirable to create that additional level of fiscal challenge for fiscal year 2022, as I stated earlier, knowing that we already had significant challenges for next year's budget that are going to be amplified to a very significant level due to the economic situation with the pandemic, I believe it's important to maintain some of that income and address first the issue of next year and look at trying to solve for fiscal year 22 over the coming year. So that is the recommendation I am making. There is a recommended motion in the cover sheets in your packet, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee has relative to this recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Any questions or comments? John?
Sorry, I was on mute. I am in favor of the recommendation. You know, I do want to call out, we did make a commitment to the community to reduce these fees gradually over time. I think when we hit the latest budget gap, I started to think about how we can bridge that gap. And this was one of the areas. So that was prior to COVID. And now post-COVID, I mean, I believe that this is the right decision, you know, moving forward. So I am in favor of this, knowing that, as Dr. Sawyer said, in FY22, it's going to be that much more difficult to step down.
Anyone else have any comments? Dale?
I agree with the move. I wonder if we need to discount at all. The funds that we will be losing by lowering the tuition are not going to be made up by anything. In addition, we may be called upon to subsidize more of the people if they have, if they fit into the free or reduced category. The number of parents who fall into that category, I think, may increase next year. We have no other source of funding to look for. We're asking the community to make donations to the school system. I would be comfortable actually just maintaining the level of tuition at what it is.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any comments? Lindsay?
If we were in another time and we were back 4 weeks ago to where the world we were living in, I certainly wouldn't be supportive and would want to stay the course of stepping down the tuition amounts. I think we not only do we make a commitment to the community that we have to wean ourselves off of monies that we don't expect to receive and be thinking on a longer term fiscal horizon. That being said, the world has changed dramatically for all of us in the last few weeks, and the budget pressures that we have and that I expect will continue to evolve and develop. As we said, our earlier slides were just a preliminary snapshot of the things right in front of us. I am supportive of the current recommendation to only step down the fees, which is I think like an 8 or 9% step down from what we had originally intended. And I appreciate all the work at the district level to try to come up with various scenarios to bridge a still very significant budget gap that we have for next year.
Thank you.
This is Fritz, if I may.
Yes.
I just want to emphasize, and I appreciate my colleagues' indulgence because I'm beating several dead horses here. This is something that I've expressed myself very strongly on in the past and will continue to do so. I, with great reluctance, am supporting the recommendation being made tonight. I remain steadfastly committed to the notion that when the new Beal School opens at the end of next year, we must do away with a tuition for full-day kindergarten. This is a K-12 public school district. We fee for buses, athletics, music lessons, co-curricular activities. In Shrewsbury Public Schools, for financial reasons, pretty much anything we can charge for, we charge for. I feel very strongly we should not be charging for a full-day kindergarten experience. I recognize that these are very difficult, trying times, and that's why I'm supporting the recommendation tonight to slow the rate at which the fee is being dropped this year. But I want to be very clear that when the next year comes, I'm going to be speaking out very, very loudly that the time has come once we have the space to give everybody full-day kindergarten. We need to get rid of that. When we started down this path, we didn't start down this path in a good budget year. Last year was a reasonably good budget year. That's not when we started down this path. We started down this path when times were tough. I remember making those remarks as chair myself to town meeting in 2018. We did this knowing this was going to be a difficult thing because it was the right thing. And I just want to reemphasize a point that I made at our last meeting. We are very much behind the times in getting rid of tuitions for full-day kindergarten. As Mr. Collins noted at our previous meeting, we're one of 30 odd, I want to say it's 37 or 38 districts across the Commonwealth that still charges tuition for full-day kindergarten, and that has been dropping at somewhere between 5 and 10 every year. If we had had the space and the ability 5 to 10 years ago to do away with this fee, we would never, no matter how bad times got, we would never consider going back to charging for kindergarten once we got rid of it. This is only an option on the table because it's something that's in progress. But I want to reemphasize what an important goal this is. We fee for so much. We fee for everything that we possibly can. I feel very, very strongly we should not be charging families to send their kids to full-day kindergarten. That to me is the line between what is and is not a fully free public school district. So I support the recommendation being made tonight with the greatest reluctance, and I want to reemphasize my commitment to the goal that we set out already in hard times, that at the end of next year, when we're looking at Beal opening, we need to stop charging families to send their kids to kindergarten. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. I echo Jason's comments. You know, I think back when we made this determination, I think it was the prudent thing to do. We were stepping down the fee so that when we reached the end, we would not have a fiscal drop off for the community to have to fill, or we would have to fill through the budget. So I think this was the right plan. However, now we're in a new situation, and we need every dollar we can for this year's budget in order to get through. And I think FY21 is not going to be a good budget year either, and FY22. So I think that unknown where we're going is just, it's a little scary. So I too reluctantly agree with this. If we weren't in this situation, I would continue on that same commitment that we made to the community. But looking at the situation, I have no problem with proceeding with Dr. Sawyer's recommendation. Anything else from the committee? Dr. Sawyer, anything further?
No, I certainly defer to the judgment of the committee relative to where you want to set this rate. My recommendation is meant to provide a small measure of relief for families next year who would have to pay this fee, and make a little bit of progress towards the ultimate goal for fiscal 22, but only a minimum amount given the pressures for next year. But in terms of the committee determining whether to, Dr. McGee made a suggestion for potentially not lowering it at all. Ultimately, whatever the committee decides, we will work with in terms of planning going forward.
Thank you. Anything further? Nope. May I have a motion to approve the adjustment?
Ms. Fritz, so I just would like to quickly poll my colleagues. Is there any appetite for freezing the tuition at its current rate?
No.
Do you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we freeze the tuition at its current rate for the coming year.
Do I have a second?
That answers it.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move forward. May I have a motion to approve the adjustments to full-day kindergarten tuition for fiscal year 2021 as illustrated in the superintendent's recommendation memo?
So moved.
Second.
A voice vote. Dale?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Lindsay?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, at our meeting on March 18th, Karen Isaacson, the Director of Extended Learning, presented a report on the fiscal status of the extended school care program, and she made a recommendation for a tuition increase of 7% for fiscal year 2021. Dr. Sawyer will now make his recommendation on this request.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz, and I appreciated Ms. Isaac's report. She does an excellent job leading the program. She, in conjunction with Mr. Collins, did an excellent analysis of what it would take to maintain that program so that we were not running in the red. She recommended a 7% tuition rate increase for next year, and I concur with that, and that is my recommendation.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from the committee? John?
Yeah, I support the recommendation. This still provides a tremendous value to the community. And, when you look at comparable towns, this is definitely still a tremendous value for families. So I support it.
Thank you. Anything else?
Just
I too
a
want
question, Mrs.
Just,
I was going to ask, did we receive any public feedback? Am I correct? We did receive.
we did. We received one email on this recommendation.
Okay. And was that a suggestion for the policy, or was that a more specific question about implementation of the program?
It was specific to a suggestion of having more of an hourly fee for parents to choose pick up and drop off.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Nope. And before I vote, also, I want to thank Ms. Isaacson. I think she does a tremendous job with this program. She does a great job of looking for areas of efficiency every year and provided a really thorough analysis of why this additional fee is needed. And this is a self-funding program, and I do support her recommendation and thank her for everything that she's doing for the district. So nothing further. May I have a motion to adjust the extended school care tuition by an increase of 7% for the 2020-2021 school year?
So moved.
Second.
And second, voice vote. Dale,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Lindsay,
Aye.
myself, aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next we have our minutes from our meeting on March 18th of 2020. Are there any changes or corrections? There being none, we'll have those marked as accepted as distributed. We do need to go into executive session this evening for the purposes of negotiations with the Shrewsbury Education Association Unit A, Shrewsbury Education Association Unit B, the Shrewsbury Paraprofessional Association, and the Shrewsbury Cafeteria Workers, where deliberation in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body. In reviewing, approving, and/or releasing executive session minutes, and we will return to open session only for the purpose of adjourning for the evening. May I have a motion to adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote. Dale,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Lindsay,
Aye.
myself, aye. Thank you and good night.